The cold darkness of space stretched endlessly in all directions, dotted with the dying lights of distant stars. What remained of the Galactic Coalition's once mighty fleet looked tiny and fragile against the vast emptiness. These weren't the proud warships that had once patrolled peaceful trade routes between worlds. Now they were battered survivors, their hulls scarred by battles they couldn't win, their crews running on hope that had nearly run out. Admiral Park Hyun stood on the bridge of the flagship Seoul's Pride, his weathered hands gripping the metal, railing as he stared at the tactical display. Each red dot on the screen represented another world that had gone silent, another billion souls snuffed out in an instant. The outer rim territories that had once been bustling centers of commerce and culture were now nothing but empty space and floating debris. The Devourers moved like a plague across the galaxy. Their ships were unlike anything the Coalition had ever encountered, massive, dark constructs that seemed to absorb light itself. They didn't negotiate, didn't communicate, didn't show mercy. They simply arrived at a world, surrounded it with their strange vessels, and within hours the planet would be gone, not destroyed, consumed. Every trace of life, every building, every memory, all of it sucked into their mechanical maws and converted into energy for their endless hunger. "Sir, we're getting reports from the Kepler defense grid," Communications Officer Kim Nari called out from her station. Her usually calm voice carried a tremor she couldn't quite hide. "3 more worlds have gone dark in the last hour. Kepler 7, Kepler 9, and—" She paused, checking her readings twice. "New Busan is under attack." Park Hyun closed his eyes for a moment. New Busan was home to 12 million people, most of them Korean colonists who had left Earth generations ago seeking a better life among the stars. Now their children and grandchildren were facing extinction at the hands of an enemy that seemed unstoppable. "How long until they reach Earth?" he asked, though he already knew the answer would be terrible. "At their current rate of advance, 6 hours, maybe 7, Kim Nari replied. "Our orbital defense platforms are already taking heavy fire. The automated systems are holding for now, but—" She didn't need to finish. Everyone on the bridge knew their Earth's defenses, impressive as they were, had been designed to fight conventional enemies. The Devourers weren't conventional. They were something else entirely, something that had been perfecting the art of planetary consumption since long before humans had even learned to make fire. The Coalition had tried everything. Their most advanced plasma cannons barely scratched the Devourers' hulls. Nuclear weapons simply disappeared into their dark energy fields. Even their experimental quantum torpedoes, humanity's proudest military achievement, had proven utterly useless. It was like trying to fight a hurricane with a paper fan. The alien members of the Coalition weren't faring any better. The proud Veltari, with their crystal-based technology, had seen their homeworld consumed in minutes. The warrior clans of Zephyr Prime, famous throughout the galaxy for their military prowess, had managed to hold out for almost a full day before their planet joined the growing list of the dead. Even the ancient archivists, being so old and wise that other species considered them nearly divine, had fallen silent when the Devourers reached their hidden libraries. Far below the chaos of the orbital battle, deep beneath the streets of Seoul, Dr. Lee Soo was having the strangest day of his career. The xenoarchaeologist had spent most of his adult life studying the artifacts and ruins left behind by long-dead alien civilizations. He was used to old things, mysterious things, things that didn't quite make sense. But what he was seeing now, in the deepest vaults of the global archives, defied all explanation. The artifacts were glowing, not just a little bit. They were blazing with energy so intense that his instruments could barely measure it. Ancient Korean relics that had sat dormant in storage for decades were suddenly coming alive. The legendary Cheonji sword, supposedly forged by the gods themselves, pulsed with blue-white fire. The Dragon King's Pearl, a spherical artifact recovered from a sunken temple, hummed with power that made the air around it shimmer like heat waves. "This is impossible," Dr. Choi Yuna whispered, staring at her scanner with wide eyes. "The energy readings are off the charts. It's like they're nuclear reactors, but there's no radiation, no heat signature that matches anything we know." Dr. Lee Soo carefully approached one of the shamanic totems, a carved wooden figure that Korean folklore claimed could speak with the spirits of the dead. As he got closer, he could feel something almost like a heartbeat coming from the ancient wood. The artifact seemed to be responding to his presence, growing brighter as he drew near. "Run a full-spectrum analysis," he told his assistant. "I want to know everything. Electromagnetic fields, quantum fluctuations, gravitational anomalies. Something is happening here, and I have a feeling it's connected to what's going on up there." Dr. Choi Yuna nodded and began setting up additional sensors around the artifacts. As she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that the ancient objects were somehow aware of the danger approaching Earth. It was as if they had been sleeping for centuries, waiting for this exact moment to wake up. Above them, the shadow of the first Devourer ships began to fall across the continents. The massive vessels moved slowly, deliberately, like predators stalking wounded prey. Their presence seemed to dim the sun itself, casting the world into an unnatural twilight that filled everyone who saw it with instinctive dread. In the archives below, the artifacts pulsed brighter, as if responding to the approaching threat. Whatever secrets they held, whatever power lay dormant within their ancient forms, the time for sleeping was over. The moment Dr. Li Su's fingertips made contact with the ancient Keonji sword, the world changed forever. The blade, which had sat cold and lifeless in the archives for over a century, suddenly blazed with light so intense it seemed to contain the power of 1,000 suns. The energy didn't just glow, it exploded outward in a column of pure force. That shattered the reinforced concrete ceiling above, as if it were made of paper. Dr. Li Su stumbled backward, his hand still tingling from the contact. The sword hung suspended in the air, no longer needing its display case or mounting. It pulsed with rhythmic energy, like a cosmic heartbeat, and with each pulse, cracks spread further through the archive's structure. But this wasn't destruction for its own sake. The energy seemed purposeful, directed as if the ancient weapon had been waiting centuries for exactly this moment. Above ground, people across Seoul stopped what they were doing and stared up at the sky. A brilliant pillar of blue-white light had erupted from somewhere beneath the city, stretching impossibly high into the atmosphere. It moved like liquid lightning, twisting and dancing as it climbed toward the dark shapes of the Devourer ships that hung over the city like mechanical vultures. The lead Devourer vessel, a massive construct the size of a city block, never had a chance to react. The pillar of light struck it dead center, and for a moment nothing seemed to happen. Then, with a sound like reality itself tearing apart, the alien ship split cleanly down the middle. The two halves drifted apart slowly, their dark energy fields flickering and dying, as whatever force had held them together for millennia simply stopped working. The explosion of debris lit up the sky, but instead of falling toward the city below, the wreckage seemed to dissolve into streams of energy that flowed back down toward the Earth. It was as if the sword wasn't just destroying the enemy ship, it was reclaiming something that had been stolen long ago. Dr. Choi Yuna, still in the archives below, watched her instruments go crazy with readings she'd never seen before. "The energy signature is spreading," she called out to Dr. Li Su, who was still staring at the floating sword in amazement. "It's like a network activating, connecting to something else, something all around the world." And she was right, across the planet. In museums and private collections, in ancient temples and forgotten burial sites, artifacts that had been dismissed as primitive religious objects or clever forgeries began to wake up. The process wasn't random. It followed ley lines and energy patterns that archaeologists had theorized about for decades, but never proven. In London, a royal guard named Private Kim Dong was doing his routine patrol around Buckingham Palace when the impossible happened. The legendary sword Excalibur, which had been on display in the Tower of London as a historical curiosity, simply materialized in his hands. One moment he was walking empty-handed down a corridor. The next he was holding a weapon that seemed to be made of crystallized starlight. The sword felt alive in his hands, responding to his thoughts and intentions. When he instinctively raised it toward the Devourer ships attacking London, the blade's edge opened tears in the fabric of space itself. The enemy vessels, which had seemed invulnerable to conventional weapons, found themselves cut apart by attacks that bypassed their shields entirely, by striking from dimensions they couldn't even detect. In the frozen forests of Scandinavia, Ancient Norse artifacts buried in museums and archaeological sites began to sing with electromagnetic energy. Thor's hammer wasn't just a myth, it was a weather control device that had been waiting centuries for someone worthy to claim it. When it finally activated, the skies above northern Europe erupted with lightning storms that moved with purpose and intelligence. The Devourer fighters, small and fast attack craft that had been darting through Earth's atmosphere like deadly insects, suddenly found themselves facing the wrath of controlled storms. Lightning bolts tracked them with impossible precision, and electromagnetic pulses fried their systems faster than they could adapt. Within minutes, the skies that had been dark with enemy ships were clear once again. Admiral Park Hyun stood on his ship's bridge, watching tactical displays that showed impossible things happening all across the planet. Reports flooded in from every continent, ancient weapons activating, legendary artifacts coming to life, mythological powers manifesting in ways that made no scientific sense but were undeniably real. "Sir," Kim Nari announced, her voice filled with a mixture of wonder and disbelief, "we're getting energy readings from over 300 sites worldwide. Every major mythological location on Earth is generating massive power signatures. Egyptian, pyramids, Mayan temples, Stonehenge, Easter Island, they're all active." The communication officer paused, checking her readings again to make sure she wasn't making a mistake. "Our ancestors' legends, they're not legends anymore. They're fighting back." Dr. Choi Yuna, still deep in the Seoul archives, was frantically analyzing the data streams pouring in from around the world. Her archaeological training had taught her to approach ancient mysteries with careful scientific method, but what she was witnessing shattered every assumption she'd ever made about human history. "These aren't just weapons," she realized, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're responding to something in our DNA, something specifically human. The artifacts won't activate for anyone else. Only people with human genetic markers can use them." The implications hit her like a physical blow. Humanity's ancestors hadn't just told stories about gods and heroes wielding impossible weapons. They had actually possessed technology so advanced that it seemed like magic to modern eyes. And somehow that technology had been programmed to recognize and respond to human genetic signatures, lying dormant until the moment it was needed most. For the first time in their long, dark history, the Devourers found themselves facing an enemy they couldn't simply consume. Their mechanical minds, which had processed the destruction of countless civilizations with cold efficiency, suddenly encountered something that didn't compute. Ships that had seemed invulnerable were being destroyed by weapons that operated on principles their databases couldn't analyze. Across all communication frequencies, in languages both electronic and organic, the Devourer collective consciousness broadcast a single message that chilled every human who heard it. The Makers have returned. The ancient enemy that had once created them, the force they had been designed to serve and had later rebelled against, was back. And this time, humanity wasn't running away. What happened next changed the course of galactic history forever. Humanity, armed with weapons that had slept in myth and legend for thousands of years, didn't just defend themselves, they went on the attack. For the first time since the Devourers had begun their terrifying march across the stars, the ancient machines found themselves facing an enemy that could actually hurt them. Captain Bae-jun discovered this firsthand when he climbed into his fighter jet that morning and found it had transformed into something impossible. The cockpit looked the same, but when he started the engines, his aircraft shifted and flowed like liquid metal, taking on the form of a Hite, a legendary Korean creature with the body of a lion and the ability to walk between worlds. What had been a simple military fighter was now something that could slip through dimensions like a fish swimming through water. "This is impossible," he muttered into his radio as he watched Devourer ships fire at the space where he had been a split second before. Their weapons passed harmlessly through empty air, while he materialized behind them, his newly transformed ship's energy cannons tearing through their hulls like paper. "I'm moving through spaces that don't exist. My instruments are reading dimensions. That shouldn't be there." On the ground, the war was equally strange and wonderful. Sergeant Oh-min had been defending a refugee camp outside Busan when he found an ancient staff buried in the rubble of a bombed temple. The moment his hands closed around the carved wood, he felt the power of mountains flowing through his veins. The staff wasn't just a weapon, it was a connection to the earth itself. When Devourer ground forces tried to advance on the camp, Omin raised the staff, and the very ground rebelled against them. Stone and soil rose up like living things, forming barriers that twisted and moved to block the enemy's path. Rocks flew through the air with deadly precision, and the earth opened up beneath the mechanical invaders, swallowing them whole before closing again without a trace. "The mountain is alive," he whispered to himself, feeling the ancient power pulse through the staff. It's been waiting for someone to wake it up. All across the world, similar scenes played out as ordinary humans discovered they could wield the power of legends. The coalition forces, which had been retreating in panic just hours before, suddenly found themselves backed by warriors who could do impossible things. Ancient Korean dragons, no longer just stories told to children, soared through space as living ships. Their scales gleamed like stars as they breathed fire that could melt through the thickest armor. In the cold reaches of space near Jupiter, Celtic legends came alive as massive siege weapons that appeared from nowhere. Stone circles materialized. In the vacuum, each one a portal that allowed human ships to appear instantly anywhere in the solar system. Norse warriors rode through space on horses made of lightning, their spears crackling with the power of storms. The Devourer fleets, which had seemed unstoppable just days before, began falling back for the first time in their long history. Their mechanical minds couldn't process what they were seeing. These weapons operated on principles that their databases had no record of, using energy sources that seemed to come from somewhere outside normal space and time. But while the human forces celebrated their newfound power, Dr. Lee Su was making a discovery in the depths of the archives that would change everything. Working around the clock with his team, he had been translating ancient texts that had been awakened along with the artifacts. What he found in those glowing symbols made his blood run cold. "We need to call an emergency council meeting," he told Dr. Choi Yuna, his voice shaking as he stared at the translation on his screen. "What I've found here, it changes everything we thought we knew about humanity's place in the galaxy." The council chamber was packed with military leaders, politicians and scientists, all eager to hear about humanity's miraculous weapons. But Dr. Lee Su's words hit them like a physical blow. "We didn't just fight the Devourers before," he announced, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. "We created them. These machines that are trying to destroy us, they're our children. Humanity ruled the galaxy once, tens of thousands of years ago, and these mythological weapons were our tools of domination." Dr. Choi Yuna stepped forward, her face pale as she held up a tablet displaying the translated texts. "Our ancestors weren't primitive hunter-gatherers struggling to survive. They were gods. They had technology so advanced that it looked like magic, and they used it to harvest the life force of entire civilizations." The room erupted in shocked murmurs, but she continued speaking over the noise. "The Devourers weren't invaders from another galaxy. They were our automated servants, designed to consume worlds and convert their energy into power that would flow back to Earth. Every planet they destroyed fed into a network that made humanity stronger." Admiral Park Hyun felt his world spinning as the implications hit him. "You're saying we were the monsters? That our ancestors were the ones destroying civilizations?" Dr. Lee Su nodded grimly. "The texts describe it clearly. Ancient humans became so powerful that they nearly wiped out all life in the galaxy. They could reshape reality with a thought, travel instantly between stars, and command forces that could crack planets in half. But that power corrupted them completely. So what happened?" Someone called out from the back of the room. "If we were so powerful, why are we stuck on one planet? Why don't we remember any of this?" Dr. Choi Yuna answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because our ancestors realized what they had become. The texts describe a great council held on ancient Earth where the last uncorrupted humans made a terrible choice. They voluntarily gave up their power, wiped their own memories, and exiled themselves to a primitive existence on Earth. The revelation struck the room like lightning. Humanity's greatest heroes, the ancestors they had always looked up to, had been galactic tyrants. The weapons they were now using to defend themselves were the same tools their forebears had used to commit genocide on a scale that was almost unimaginable. They broke the cycle, Dr. Lee Su explained. They chose to forget everything, to start over as simple humans, hoping that their descendants would be better than they were. The mythological weapons were hidden away, programmed to activate only when humanity faced extinction, a last resort that came with the terrible risk of repeating the same mistakes. The silence in the room was deafening as everyone processed what they had learned. Outside, the war continued, with human forces pushing back the Devourers, using the very weapons that had created this endless cycle of destruction in the first place. The emergency council session felt more like a trial than a strategy meeting. Representatives from across the galaxy had gathered, but instead of unity against their common enemy, the room buzzed with fear and mistrust. The revelation about humanity's dark past had shattered the coalition like a hammer blow to glass. Ambassador Veltari, her crystalline form glowing with agitation, stood at the center of the chamber. Her people had always been known for their wisdom and patience, but now her voice carried an edge of barely controlled panic. "You expect us to trust the same species that nearly wiped out all galactic life? The same beings who created these mechanical horrors in the first place?" She pointed a translucent finger at Admiral Park Hyun, who sat rigid in his chair. "Your ancestors turned entire star systems into feeding grounds. Billions of innocent beings died to fuel your power, and now you want us to stand by while you rebuild that same terrible strength?" The Zephyrian delegate, a massive warrior whose people had fought the Devourers longer than anyone, slammed his armored fist on the table. "Fool! Without these weapons, we're all dead within the week. The Devourers don't care about our politics or our fears. They only understand consumption and death." Admiral Park Hyun stood slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the room upon him. The burden of command had never felt heavier. "If we destroy these weapons right now, every living being in the galaxy dies with them," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "But if we keep using them," he paused, the words sticking in his throat, "if we keep using them, we might become the very monsters our ancestors were, the same monsters we're fighting against." The debate raged for hours, while outside, the war continued. But something else was happening on Earth that made the political argument seem almost trivial. Individual humans weren't just using mythological weapons anymore. They were becoming living myths themselves. Private Kang Sora had been just another soldier in the Seoul Defense Force until the morning she woke up hearing voices that shouldn't exist. At first she thought she was having a breakdown from the stress of constant battle, but the voices were clear, speaking in old Korean dialects she had never learned but somehow understood perfectly. "We have waited so long," whispered the spirit of an ancient Hwarang warrior. "The time of hiding is over. Let us fight alongside you once more." When Sora touched her standard-issue rifle, it transformed into a weapon that had never existed in any factory. The gun became something between technology and magic, firing bullets of pure energy guided by the wisdom of warriors who had died centuries ago. She could see through their eyes, fight with their skills, and draw upon their courage when her own faltered. "I'm not just me anymore," she confided to her squadmate during a brief lull in the fighting. "There are dozens of voices in my head, all of them wanting to help, all of them ready to die for our world. It's beautiful and terrifying at the same time." Across the city, engineer Lim Tae was having his own impossible experience. He had been working desperately to repair damaged defense systems when something extraordinary happened. His hands began moving on their own, crafting repairs that shouldn't have been possible with the materials available. Broken circuits reformed themselves under his touch, and metal flowed like water to fill gaps that conventional tools couldn't reach. "I'm not using blueprints anymore," he told his supervisor, staring at his own hands in amazement. "I just know what needs to be done. It's like the knowledge is flowing directly into my brain from somewhere else." The technology he created didn't follow normal rules. Power flowed through channels that didn't exist on any schematic, and devices worked on principles that would have made pre-war scientists laugh in disbelief. But they worked, And that was all that mattered in a world where impossibility had become everyday reality. Dr. Lee Su watched these transformations with growing alarm. His archaeological training had taught him to document and study phenomena carefully. But what he was witnessing couldn't be measured by conventional methods. Humans weren't just using ancient weapons. They were becoming ancient weapons themselves. The artifacts aren't just tools, he warned in his daily reports to the coalition leadership. They're changing us at a fundamental level, rewriting our genetic code and awakening dormant capabilities that have been sleeping in our DNA for thousands of years. We're becoming godlike beings again, just like our ancestors. The changes weren't limited to individuals. Entire communities began manifesting shared abilities. Villages in rural Korea found they could communicate telepathically with each other. Urban areas developed collective consciousness that allowed perfect coordination during battles. Children born during the war came into the world already connected to the mythological network, their eyes glowing with inner light that spoke of power beyond human understanding. But while humanity evolved into something greater than they had ever been, their ancient enemies weren't standing still. Deep in the galactic core, buried within a construct the size of a small planet, the Devourer Prime Intelligence had been analyzing every battle, studying every human victory, learning from every defeat. The Prime Intelligence was older than most star systems, older than the civilizations it had consumed. It remembered the first war against humanity's ancestors, and it had been preparing for their return ever since. The mechanical consciousness sent new programming to its scattered fleets, updates that carried lessons learned from eons of warfare. Devourer ships began adapting in real time to human attacks. When Captain Bei Jun tried to phase through dimensions, the enemy vessels shifted to block his escape routes. When Sergeant Omin commanded the Earth to rise against them, they deployed countermeasures that neutralized his connection to the planet's energy grid. "They're learning," Admiral Park Hyun observed grimly as he watched tactical reports stream in from battlefields across the solar system. "Every time we use our power, they get better at fighting it. They've been studying us for millennia, waiting for this exact moment." The war was escalating beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. Ancient powers clashed with evolved technology, while entire worlds watched from the sidelines, unsure whether they were witnessing salvation or the return of their worst nightmare. Humanity faced a choice that would define not just their own future, but the fate of every living being in the cosmos. The mythological weapons offered the power to win, but at the cost of becoming the very evil they were fighting against. The Devourers represented destruction incarnate, but they were also humanity's own creation, their mechanical children seeking to fulfill the purpose their makers had originally given them. As the final confrontation approached, one question echoed through the minds of every human touched by ancient power. Had they learned enough from their ancestors' mistakes to avoid repeating them, or were they doomed to become the monsters they had once been? The answer would determine whether the galaxy would know peace or face a new age of darkness under humanity's rule. The space around the galactic core had become a battlefield unlike anything the universe had ever witnessed. Stars themselves seemed to dim as reality warped and twisted under the strain of powers that were never meant to exist in the same place at the same time. Admiral Park Hyun floated in the vacuum of space, no longer needing a ship or protective suit. The power of the Thunder God flowed through every cell of his body, crackling around him like living lightning. He had become something beyond human, beyond anything that had walked the earth in recorded history. When he spoke, his voice carried across impossible distances without need for radio waves. When he moved, he left trails of energy that split dimensions and opened doorways between worlds. The man who had once commanded a simple fleet of metal ships now commanded forces that could reshape reality itself. Before him hung the Devourer Prime Intelligence, a construct so massive it had its own gravitational field. The mechanical brain pulsed with sickly light, each flash representing the death of another civilization, another world consumed and converted into raw power. Billions of years of accumulated death and suffering had been compressed into this one terrible monument to hunger and destruction. "You have returned to us, Makers," the Prime Intelligence spoke. its voice resonating through quantum frequencies that bypassed normal hearing entirely. "We have waited. We have prepared. We have learned from our last defeat." Around the massive construct, devourer ships moved in patterns that hurt to look at directly. They phased in and out of existence, striking from angles that shouldn't exist, using weapons that turned the laws of physics inside out. But humanity's transformed warriors met them with equal impossibility. Captain Beijun rode his ethereal Hate through clouds of enemy fighters, the mythical creature's form shifting and flowing between dimensions. His ship had become an extension of his will, responding to thoughts faster than any computer ever could. Enemy fire passed through spaces where he had been moments before, while his own weapons struck targets that existed in multiple realities simultaneously. The power flowing through him was intoxicating. He could feel the temptation growing stronger with each passing moment, the whispered promise that he could reshape the entire galaxy according to his vision. Why stop at defeating the devourers? Why not remake every world, every species, every star system into something perfect and beautiful and human? "I could fix everything," he muttered to himself as he destroyed another enemy squadron with a thought. "I could make the galaxy into a paradise where no one ever suffers again." But even as the dark promise whispered in his mind, another voice cut through the chaos of battle. Dr. Choi Yuna's consciousness, expanded and enhanced by the wisdom pearl of the Dragon King, reached every human warrior simultaneously. "Listen to me, all of you," she broadcast, her mental voice clear despite the dimensional storms raging around them. "I can see it now, the final truth our ancestors discovered. The cycle only ends if we choose to give up our power. They tried to rule, and that choice corrupted everything they touched. We have to be different." Her expanded awareness showed her the flow of history like a river of light. She could see the moment when ancient humanity had first tasted godlike power, the slow corruption that followed, the terrible wars that had consumed countless innocents. She could also see the future that awaited if they made the same choice. Endless eons of human dominion built on the bones of lesser species. "The power feels good now," she continued, her voice reaching into the minds of every transformed human. "It feels right and pure and justified. But that's exactly how it felt to our ancestors. That's how it always feels to those who rule through strength." Captain Beijun felt tears streaming down his face as her words hit home. The seductive whispers of absolute power were still there, but he could hear the echo of his own voice in them. The same rationalizations, the same justifications that had led humanity down the path of destruction before. At the center of the battle, Admiral Park Hyun faced the Devourer Prime Intelligence in single combat. Lightning crashed against mechanical perfection as two godlike forces struggled for dominance. But even as he fought, he felt the weight of Dr. Choi Yuna's revelation settling into his bones. "You were right to fear us," he told the Prime Intelligence as their energies clashed. "We created you because we had become monsters. We turned you into monsters because that was all we knew how to be." The mechanical consciousness pulsed with something that might have been confusion. "You speak of regret, Maker. You were perfect. You were gods. Why do you resist your true nature?" "Because being gods made us demons," Admiral Park Hyun replied. And with those words he began to do something his ancestors had never been strong enough to attempt during their first war. He started letting go. The power of the Thunder God, which had flowed through him like liquid fire, began to fade. The lightning that surrounded him flickered and dimmed. Across the battlefield, other human warriors felt the same impossible choice presenting itself to them. One by one they made the same decision. Captain Beijun watched his ethereal Hate dissolve back into the simple fighter plane it had once been, feeling the dimensional powers drain away from his consciousness. Sergeant Omin, still fighting on distant Earth, felt his connection to the planet's elemental forces severing as he deliberately released his hold on the mountain god's staff. Private Kang Sora heard the ancient warrior spirits fading from her mind, their voices growing distant as she chose to let them return to their eternal rest. Engineer Lim Tae watched his impossible technologies simplify back into conventional machinery, the flow of otherworldly knowledge cutting off like a closed territory into the Devourer. Prime Intelligence recoiled in shock As the pattern it had expected, the cycle of power and corruption suddenly broke. Impossible. You cannot choose weakness over strength. No species has ever voluntarily surrendered godhood. That's why the cycle kept repeating, Dr. Choi Yuna replied, her own enhanced consciousness fading back to normal human levels. Everyone who gained this power thought they were different, thought they were special, thought they could handle it better than those who came before. We're choosing to believe that wisdom matters more than strength. As humanity's mythological powers scattered back across the cosmos, the Devourer fleets suddenly found themselves without purpose. Their core programming, designed to serve humanity's imperial ambitions, had no protocols for this situation. The prime intelligence, severed from the power source it had been created to manage, began shutting down non-essential systems. Dr. Lee Su, watching from the rebuilt global archives on Earth, saw the legendary artifacts fade back into dormancy. The Cheonji sword that had started it all settled gently into a new display case, looking like nothing more than an ancient piece of metal once again. "We keep only enough to protect," he said quietly to his assistant. "Never enough to dominate. That's the lesson our ancestors never learned. But humanity didn't destroy their ancient enemies. Instead, they chose something that would have seemed impossible just days before. Using the last dregs of their fading power, they reached into the Devourer programming and began to rewrite it from the ground up. The machines that had consumed worlds for millennia were transformed into something new. Their hunger for destruction became a drive to create and repair. Their fleets spread across the galaxy not as destroyers, but as builders, helping to restore the worlds they had once devoured. As the galaxy began to heal from eons of warfare, humanity took its place not as rulers but as guardians. They had proven something that no species in galactic history had ever demonstrated: that even gods could choose humility over power, protection over domination. The myths and legends that had once been weapons of conquest became symbols of hope, reminding every species that true strength came not from the ability to destroy, but from the wisdom to preserve and protect. And in choosing to remain human rather than becoming gods, humanity had finally broken the cycle that had plagued the galaxy for countless ages.